Well, I went in the Guard first in 40.
Oh, that I want to find out about.
For a year. Enlisted for a year.
Let's see.
Oh, gee, before I forget, my papers are there. Why, he sent me a copy of that letter.
Yes, the response is wonderful.
And then these all go in the archives?
Yes, they do.
Are they going to print this in any way or distribute it?
Probably in some form. We don't really know yet. Our job at this juncture is basically to go get as much information, as many of these as we can, then let somebody else, or if we have the time down the road, sift through it. Because to some degree we're going against the gun, against the clock.
Oh, okay.
So
you mean funding and that?
Well, that nobody's getting any younger.
You're looking at an 82-year-old guy.
Oh my God!
You're kidding.
1919. Yeah.
You're doing. If I looked that well at 60, I'd be happy.
It's in the genes.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're
Everybody
right.
thinks I dye my hair, and I do this once in a while. Is it on straight?
All right, just a second. Let me just take a couple of glances here. So you're in Delmar.
Delmar, yeah.
Okay. What I'm going to do is just do an opening statement, and then I'll start asking you a few questions, and you'll take it from there.
Fine.
Okay. We are interviewing Mr. Charles W. Reeves at Latham headquarters. It's September 3rd.
No, it's August.
August 13th, 2001. Michael Akey, interviewer. Wayne Clark, videographer. Mr. Reeves, where were you born?
I was born actually in a hospital in Yonkers, New York, but I was living in Manhattan, the northern end of Manhattan, just above Columbia's Baker Field, where the Hudson meets the Harlem River.
Okay.
And the date was April 30th, 1919.
Did you grow up in that area?
Yes, I grew up, and it was quite rural then. Went to a local school, public school number 7, and then George Washington High School on Washington Heights. I graduated from there. Took a job for $13 a week at Chase National then, as a runner. No computers in those days. You delivered checks to other banks. And went to NYU School of Commerce at night. Also went for a while to Delahanty Institute. I was going with a girl who was the daughter of a policeman, and my goal was to be a New York City policeman, which wasn't very lofty, but in those days it was. And then in 1940, a group of us, knowing that the draft might come, joined the New York 7th Regiment, known as the Silk Stocking on Park Avenue.
What was that like?
Fantastic. We were issued 1903 Springfields, wrap putts, campaign hats from World War I, and we drilled once or twice a week. As the fall came up in 1940, I believe we were federalized in October, and went away, I think in January of 41, to Camp Stewart, Georgia, which was a reclaimed swamp. We spent the first 6 months down at the sawmill bringing in sawdust to lessen the effect of the wetness. The streets were practically underwater. We heard later it was some kind of a boondoggle between some state senator and the government. I shouldn't say that this is a fact, but it was terrible land, and we had Sibley stoves in our tent, and there were parameters, green with a floor, and if you didn't loosen the ropes after a rainstorm, they'd split. The sun had come out, and the ropes would tighten, and it would be just like tearing a sheet of paper, and you'd hear it go. And the other, until we got spark arresters on the Sibley stoves, many a tent went up. Then they finally put the spark arrestor on top of the chimney. And
How many guys to a tent?
8, I believe.
8?
And down the end of the street was a Lister bag on a tripod with, it's a canvas bag, supported and with little toggles or whatever you call them to put your canteen under and get water. Cokes were a nickel, and we drank maybe 20 a day in that hot, humid weather. And I recall getting in a convoy and going up to the red and the blue war games in 41. This was prior to Pearl Harbor. And there were war games in Louisiana, but we were ill-equipped. We had, as I said, 1903 Springfields. Trucks had big signs on them, tank. I remember when we came back from North Carolina, the maneuvers, I can't remember the two generals' names, the red and the blue for the moment. We went down to Fernandina, Florida, and on a tripod higher than that, we had a 30 caliber air-cooled, and someone down in the dunes would release small balloons. And this was our first attempt at anti-aircraft. Later on, we were equipped with 37 millimeter anti-aircraft and much later, Bofors.
So you were turned into a AAA unit.
We went away as the 207th, AAA, the 207th.
How did the guys feel about that? A, they were not part of the division, and
Right.
B, they went from infantrymen to artillerymen,
Right.
aircraft artillery.
But we went full cycle, which I'll mention later in the Philippines. We went back to infantry. Well, that was a different unit. But I remember the 209th was from Rochester. The 212th, I think, was from over in the Bronx. And most of these units ended up at Stewart, where we fired our rifles and qualified. And eventually we got the 37 millimeter on a four-wheeler, which we had towed. And I guess I'd have to jump from there to...
Well, what was basic like for you?
Oh, it was great. We drilled every day in the hot sun and consumed many cokes, of course.
Right.
I finally got promoted to corporal, and by the time Pearl Harbor came, oh, I have to tell you about Pearl Harbor. We were playing touch football in the street. We did that quite a bit. We had boxing and softball and touch football. Somebody ran out of a tent and said the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor. And we said in unison, "Where's Pearl Harbor?" The OD did not know where it was. He went back in and finally came out and said, "It's in Hawaii." We all, in some manner, got into the Hotel de Soto in Savannah, which was maybe 30 miles away. And this is an incredible piece of history. We were drinking beer, and all of a sudden they announced that all Camp Stewart should be outside in 20 minutes. The buses were halfway there and so on. We got on the buses and trucks and went back to camp, put on the fatigues, went down to the sawmill, and were told to load these 6 and 8 foot logs on the trucks. Stewart was in the shape of a big L with a massive parade ground in the middle. And the general wasn't going to be caught short. We spread those logs across the parade ground so that no plane could land. no glider. Now, I look back today and I say, well, he's not going to be caught short like Short and Kimmel were at Hawaii. And we marveled about this stroke of genius. But then we said, can they cross the Atlantic with anything these days? Well, we cadreed most of our officers out, and as a side issue, I just communicated with a man named John Colin Murphy, who writes this comic strip, Prince Valiant, which is in the Times-Union. Every Sunday you'll see John Colin Murphy. He was a private with us at Stewart. And I just, as I said, I heard from him. We reunited with a few other fellows from there. Well, where did I go next? We went up to Fort Totten for a while, which is on the Sound, and then over to Fort Wadsworth, which is at the neck of the Narrows, where New York Harbor goes out. And I had 90 millimeter emplaced in turrets. And I didn't know much about 90 millimeter. I was a sergeant now. And we thought we were pretty good. And a colonel came by one day, and I remember he said, elevate the gun up to 90 degrees. And the gunner could not get that shell up no matter what he did. And we were always firing out this way and drilling, and it was a great lesson to me. I went from Fort Wadsworth to the roof of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, away from 90 millimeters, which we weren't really trained on. We were just filling in. And on the roof of the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the ordnance building, I was introduced to a 20 millimeter Oerlikon, which had a pedestal and shoulder guards that came in, and the officer in charge of the whole defense said to me, Sergeant, when you dry run, use dry ammo. Here's the clip of fake ammo, and you shove this thing in. Because your predecessor put an AP, an armor piercing, into 120 Broadway, which is about 4 miles away, and didn't kill anybody. So we were very careful there at the Navy Yard. And it was my first introduction to the seamier side of life. We walked by a bar one night and the door flew open and a sailor, I can see it yet, hit this woman right on the face and knocked her into the gutter. And I go over to pick her up and the sailor says to me, don't touch her, dog face, she just tried to take my wallet. And then I went to OCS in the fall of '43 and finished, I'm very proud of this, I finished 5th out of 450. And I confirmed that with a telegram from 2 of my previous officers. And it's in the book from the AAA at North Carolina. From there, I had my choice, and I felt guilty. It was now 43, and a lot of a couple of my friends had died, either in pilot training or some other thing. So I took Overseas West, which landed me up at Camp Hahn, California, in a 487th AAA. We trained out in Indio, the Mojave, and I did a terrible thing, which I probably could have been court-martialed for. We could not hit the sleeve with the 40 millimeters. Well, I ran into a guy who was a B-10 pilot towing the sleeves, and our color was blue. Should I?
Go ahead.
I don't think they can do anything to me now.
No.
So I got a stick and a can of paint and put about 10 holes in this 20-foot sleeve, and my friend, and I can't for the life of me pull his name, took it up, and we were finally okayed as certified on the 40 millimeter. But I think I vindicated myself later, as I'll tell you. So we went from there up to Oregon for maneuvers, came back to Camp Han, and then went up to, on the Columbia River, the barracks. Oh, I can't think of the name of the barracks. It's
okay.
So we were there for a few weeks staging. We had really whipped this outfit into good shape. I was a second lieutenant and a platoon commander. And on March 29th, and that's according to my diary there, we set sail on a 10,000-ton Dutch boat called the Kota Agoing. And that's when I started this pencil diary, which I have with me here. And we stopped at San Pedro for oil and fuel or whatever.
Did you know where you were going?
No. No. I had no idea, except we were going somewhere in the east, the Near East. The food was incredible on it. I just saw the second night out, I had a filet mignon. And there was a great crew. They were Dutch. There were engineers and medics, and we had all our 40s and multiple 50s mounted on what I called was a searchlight trailer with a generator, batteries, and so on, and great mobility. Incredible mobility, and 4 air-cooled 50s. Yeah, they were air-cooled, not water. And each platoon had, I think, 140 and 150. I think I had 4. A very slow, torturous journey. I remember boxing. We boxed, and I had fought when I was a private, and as a second lieutenant, I guess I was too friendly with the enlisted men because it took a long time to get the silver bar. Because later in New Guinea, I played on the enlisted men's softball team. Well, anyway, according to my notes, we landed first at Milne Bay, but never disembarked, and then up to Ora Bay, then toward Finchhaven, and back to Ora Bay, and according to my notes, on May 7th, which would have been 37 days, we finally put our feet on land. And I tell that story today, and they said, that's impossible. We stayed on the ship, and finally, Wadki, Sami. Wadki, I think, was the area, and Sami was the island. Wadki, Sami. We took up a perimeter at the southern end and watched P-47s. We were pretty close to the Japanese, so we put out tripwire, and this was our first night on land where we bivouacked. We put out tripwire, the tin cans and the stones, and there was no infantry ahead of us. It seemed to be up ahead. And all of a sudden, that night, raining like the dickens, we hear a rifle shot. Make a long story short, somebody got up and moved, and some trigger happy. Anyway, 3 dead, 7 wounded, and the 3 dead were under a shelter half of a pup tent with the black boots sticking out, and I thought we were going to be disbanded and sent home in my naivete. I spent the night face down in the mud and telling my people, don't move. But D Battery lost the 3 and the 7 wounded, and they were shooting at each other. And the officer in charge of the RN came by and said, it happens every time with the new untrained trigger happy. Luckily, my gang survived. Well, we were there for quite a while. It rained. I remember one of my boys, it got to him. He would stand on a footlocker in his tent and lead an imaginary band. So I finally talked to the captain, and he told me, he said, go down to the base hospital. So I went in and I sat there, and there was this psychiatrist. And after about 10 minutes, I thought he was grilling me. I finally said, he's the problem. Yeah, but I want your background, your relationship to him. So the Section 8, he went home, I guess. Well, then we were mustered into Liberty ship and formed a convoy, and we knew we were going to land in the Dutch East Indies on an island 2 degrees off the equator called Numfor, Dutch. There were 2 airstrips there, a fighter strip on one end, Kamiri, and on the other end were B-24s, after we landed, of course. What I meant to say was there was a fighter strip and a bomber strip. So we got into these LCTs, landing ship tank, which would take a truck and a 40 millimeter, LST, landing ship tank, LCM, whatever. And what a bombardment we put down. It was unbelievable. We didn't think anything could survive. And then this 147th, Arizona, Texas, and loads of these great Mexican kids went in first. And before nightfall, I guess, we went in, but we had to wait for the tide, and a couple got hung up. And while we were circling, those guys were still dropping the mortars, but 22 years old, whatever I was, 23, we didn't have any fear, and especially when we saw these guys charging up ahead of us. Anyway, we got in and set up our guns at the south end of the strip. And then there was no air activity at that time. And then the next day in came C-47s, and the paratroopers dropped after so we had the gun revetments up and everything, but they were reinforcing this 147th or whatever it was, Regimental Combat Team. One of our boys, Lieutenant Jones, strolled a little too far and got the first Purple Heart in the battalion from a hand grenade. And then we watched the flamethrowers go into these caves, and the odor was terrible. And they burned the Japs out with these flames. It would go from here to that wall, that blue flame. And we were there, quite a while, before we went to the Philippines. But the memorable thing was several nights we had red alerts, and the Bettys, they said they were Bettys, came over at night, but they missed the strip. They'd drop a string all the way along in the water. And speaking of that, the Aussies came in Spitfires and gave me a ride, and I think that's the one that's made out of wood, not the Spitfire, Mosquito. And they'd come back with tree branches stuck in the nacelles. These guys were wild. And they took me on a ride once, and I couldn't believe it. But the Aussies, we loved them. They'd walk out on this coral reef, and they had seen our boys fish with hand grenades, but you had to remember to throw them pretty far. And I remember one day, this poor guy threw it over there, and of course the concussion knocked him out. He must have just thrown it right near himself. Well, we played softball, the nurses came in, we had a great time. We had a beer ration, and I think it said it was 8 cents a can, I can't remember. And, but the nurses had access to 90 proof alcohol from the hospital, and they had an eyedropper, and we would put 3 drops into a can of beer, and it would be a real high. Well, as I say, I played softball, and then it was nothing for a while, and then one night we got a red alert, and I remember the gunner's name was Mendoza, and he was in the multiple 50, and we could see, it was almost dawn, and I swear I could see the flame from the from the motors as this twin engine came up the strip. And Mendoza was, and we could see the traces. And I kept saying, faster, faster, get ahead of him, get ahead of him. All of a sudden we saw a flame. And the Navy wired in and he splashed. So it was on the bulletin board, the poster at the end of our tour that we got the one plane.
Very good.
Maybe I'm going too much here.
No, not at all. This is fine.
And
How was living on the islands?
it was good. The food was good. We had tents. We didn't have platforms, but we had pyramidals. I think that's the way you pronounce it, pyramidal tent.
Much illness?
Green.
Much illness?
Not then. I got very sick in the Philippines. That's another story. But no, I don't remember. I just read this morning, I was marking a spot in my book. Early on, one of my sergeants was clearing a field of fire. He wanted to be able to go all the way down the strip, and he dropped a tree, but unfortunately it went on the gun and hurt one of the men, and that was it. But illness, no. We took our Atibrine. We all had yellow eyeballs. What else did we take? Well, of course, we all had our shots before we left. About the time it was getting real boring, we formed a convoy and we were going to Mindanao. They told us that. I can't remember the exact timing or the date, but we got into a force 9 gale, and none of our equipment went, but some went over the side on some of the, and once this gale hit, force 9 is the equivalent of, I think, 80-mile-an-hour winds, 70. The convoy scattered in case they were, they were staying pretty close together, and we had the destroyers circling and all that. So we got back together and pulled up off the coast of Mindanao, and landed on the wrong beach. But unfortunately, there was no opposition, and we set up near a Del Monte pineapple plantation. And the Filipinos were great. We had fresh eggs and fresh fruit. And there was a vegetable, I can't think of it now. It's very expensive and fatty. But anyway, they gave us some great food. And we went up the Cotabato River and met a prince who lived in a fabulous house. And his name was Datu, which I think is a prince, Datu Pendatang. And they had music, and we danced and fed, and then we made patrols. We had a small boat. By now we were turned into infantry. We had air power, and we had the northern end of the Philippines. They were up around Leyte, I guess. And we were assigned some Filipino guerrillas, and we had a tough mission. We were supposed to go up in the hills and root out the survivors from sinkings of naval vessels and Japs who were bypassed. In effect, MacArthur's brilliant leapfrogging, a lot of people were just cut off and left. We only had a couple of minor firefights, but I remember once I was in front of the patrol, and down the path came a Jap with his hands up. So I said, take him back to the rear of the column. I guess maybe we had another one there, I'm not sure. And I was bothered by this because I didn't turn it in, but I couldn't prove anything. I heard a shot, and I went back, and laying face down in the stream was the Jap prisoner with a hole in his head. And the corporal or sergeant said to me, he took this stone, and he had a pointed stone, and he was killing himself. He wanted to commit suicide. So I shot him. I never reported it, but I had to take the guy's word. I don't think any of my men would have intentionally killed somebody. And he was cut. It was a mess. Oh, we buried him and left him. Came back. We did a lot of patrols. But those are the only two memorable things. We had a couple of skirmishes. Oh, our dentist, Dr. Ponterio, flew over one day in a L5, a Piper Cub, whatever it was, and dropped a small parachute with a beer for me. Things like that you remember. And then it got kind of boring. We were ready. We were going to stage for Japan from there with I-Corps, I think. I can't remember who it was. And I suddenly came down with a fungus on my lip, dengue, and malaria, which is why I can't give blood today. So they put me in this hospital, field base, near Malabang. Malabang rings a bell. And, oh God, I was sick. And,
How was the hospital care?
oh, hospital care was marvelous, marvelous. And all of a sudden, they said Hiroshima and was it Nagasaki were hit, and we had no concept of what the atom bomb was. We had no how can they kill 400,000 or 500,000 people? Well, maybe we didn't even know that then, but we did not have any concept. It was a big secret. Mm-hmm. And boom, the war was over. And I'm lying in a 120-degree heat. And that was about it. I had a great time. So from 1940, I finally got home. Oh, and I had a Japanese pistol. I had a sword. And I had my own .45. And we came into San Francisco Harbor and came up to Sacramento, where there was a base, and then we were going to fly home to Jersey and be released from Camp Dix, which happened on New Year's Eve. But I put my little musette bag with the two pistols and some personal stuff. I don't know why the diary survived it, but we were pulling into Sacramento, and I went out and my bag was gone. And somebody said, oh, the Navy guys threw them over the side. I said, oh, come on. I never found my Japanese pistol, and I had to account for my .45 and all that embarrassing thing. Somebody took it, I guess. But I look back at the friendships we made, the impression. So now in 45, I'm 26. I met an officer in New Guinea who said to me, get a college education or you're not going to anywhere. He had worked for Coca-Cola, college graduate. So I came out running New Year's Eve of 45, and I was on terminal leave until March of 46. So I started out, I went up to Tufts, Boston College.
It's on the GI Bill?
Yeah. And I was accepted, but not until the fall. And I said, if I go to work, I'll never go back to college. So one of the bank guys whom I knew had graduated from Hamilton up here near Clinton, New York, outside of Utica. And he made a call, and I went up. And the other schools had V12 and whatever it was, they still had to move these phase out at Tufts in BC. So I went to Hamilton. Then I came back, and the Society of Quakers down in Carolina accepted me, and I sent them $25. So on the day I left, I went down to Penn Station to get on the train, and I dialed my mother for a nickel, and she said, "There's a letter here from Hamilton." I said, "I'll see you in a half an hour." So back I went and up to Hamilton, and I graduated in '49 and went with a telephone company. Spent 35 years there and retired in 1984.
So what do you think of Clinton back at the village of Clinton?
The village of Clinton? I loved it. I worked for the Modern Tailor, and I sold hair tonic for some outfit, Trim, I guess it was. And I met the Burnses, all four of them. Nick became my best friend. And Dick and I, Nick is gone now, but Dick and I've seen at our 50th reunion, and we go up there quite a bit. And I've referred several people to the school, and I just think the village was great. And so were the people, the Scalers.
Ever meet any Cheneys? Cheneys?
Cheney?
My mother's from Clinton.
No, I didn't meet him.
My father was there just after the war.
Oh, yeah? Oh, Cheney.
Cheney.
God, there's a bell.
They own part of downtown.
But that was great. I got married after my first year, and that's another reason why I didn't go down to the school in Carolina. It's Guilford. That was the name of it. And then married, and my first son was born at St. Elizabeth's in Utica. We lived in the GI barracks in back of the SIU house. Went through in 3 years, did 2 summer schools, and never regretted anything. My wife and I are now celebrating this December our 55th.
Congratulations.
So I'm very blessed, very blessed. 5 children, 7 grandchildren, and
So your general impression of your military experience?
fantastic. I loved it. I met great people, learned a lot about leadership. I think it helped me in my career. I retired as an assistant vice president of the phone company, general manager of the Northeast area, had a $300 million payroll, and I think a lot of it came the discipline I owed to the Army. We had great officers. Our National Guard group cadreed out, I don't know how many different regiments. And the discipline, the training, the morale, and the morality was all imbued, and then again reinforced with good old Hamilton. They taught me values.
Right. Well, thank you very much, Mr. Reeves. That was a great interview.
My pleasure. I tend to run off a bit.
That's okay. That's all right. I've got a little paperwork here. Yes, my mother was from Clinton.